title of this webinar is P5 and Kyno. My co-host this afternoon is Thomas Mayer from Less Pain Software. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, and thank you, David, for having us, and thanks to everyone for attending this webinar.
Yes, indeed, and thanks for joining us, Thomas. I didn't properly introduce myself, so I'm David Fox from JPY in the UK, doing a lot of webinars during this current season, so you can get me via that Archiware email address if you want to. This webinar will run for approximately 30 minutes. We will leave you guys muted, but if you have any questions that arise while you're watching the content, please type them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar interface, and we will run through all of those at the end and answer all of your questions at the end, and we'll take as much time as we need to do that. So without further delay, let's just flick through a couple of slides that will introduce Archiware for those of you that might not be familiar with it. And then I'll hand over to Thomas to do a brief introduction to Less Pain's Kyno software. So Archiware is a data management software suite. It comprises archive backup and replication tools. It's cross-platform. It runs on lots of different operating systems, including NAS devices, and also it's deployable in the cloud. And it's generally regarded as an easy product to set up by those that use it, mainly due to its web-based administration interface. So what do we mean in a little more detail by a data management software suite? We mean that we have a tool which is able to manipulate data in ways which is found particularly popular in media-rich environments like broadcast and TV and film, in particular where media files are created. We manage data via 4 separate modules, which I'll give a quick overview to in a moment. As I said, we run in pretty much every environment that you would expect us to. And we are also agnostic with regard to the kind of storage that we will read and write from. So we will support, for example, tape hardware from any vendor, any kind of disk storage, and we have quite broad support for cloud storage. Final thing on this slide is that we are not a subscription model product, and this is the same is true for Kyno. You buy the product outright, you own it forever. You can optionally pay for ongoing maintenance to be entitled to the latest versions, which will of course support the latest operating systems. So before I go into more detail about what those modules are, Thomas is going to say a few words about Kyno.
Yes, I'll briefly go through what Kyno is and what it's used for on these 2 slides. So Kyno is a versatile desktop application used in various parts of a typical video production workflow, ranging from on-location DIT type work over to ingest and post-production, all the way to media management in small and medium teams, typically working off of a shared storage. It's on the market since 3.5 years. Our customers range from production companies, both small and large, creative agencies, corporate video departments. We get a lot content producers like the YouTuber Linus Tech, who just recently put out a favorable review of Kyno, but also up to all larger broadcasters like ABC Australia, Al Jazeera, or the largest public broadcaster in Germany, for example. As Kyno is a desktop-only application, it's really easy and simple to set up. It runs on both macOS and Windows. It doesn't require any extra hardware, no servers or databases to set up and maintain. All you need is really a desktop computer with some attached storage, be it external drives or NAS or SAN. In terms of the things that you typically do with Kyno, which is on the next slide, we put up a list here, but we'll go into those more in the following demo. What's important here is why we put all these tools under one interface in Kyno is that it allows us to capture metadata very early and carry it all the way through to post-production and archiving. So it really covers that part from camera to edit and into archive. The key features that our customers find important are the ease of use, the easy to use interface, because we really want to put Kyno in the hands of everyone who deals with video footage in a professional environment. Its wide format support, important for obvious reasons, because you want to use the same tool for all your footage, be it from a Panasonic P2 camera, from a Red camera, from a Blackmagic camera. We've added a Blackmagic RAW support, for example, in the latest 1.8 release. Red RAW we already have, and we'll add those in the coming. We'll add more of those in the coming releases. Equally important is that Kyno integrates with all the tools that our target audience already uses, like the editing applications, Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, Avid Media Composer, as well as other important integrations, for example, Frame.io, very popular and great cloud collaboration and review platform, and of course, Archiware P5 Archive for going into archive. So this gives you a quick, rough idea of what Kyno is. I'll hand over back to David for more details on a typical workflow involving Archiware P5. David?
Thanks, Thomas. So as promised, just a quick overview of the 4 different modules. We'll be focusing today around the P5 Archive module. If I just grab my pointer. So it's this one here that we are most interested in this webinar, but we're a suite. So we include P5 Backup in the suite, which is a disaster recovery tool. Everybody knows what a backup product is. Everybody needs to have 2 backups of their important data. So consider P5 Backup if you're not already backing your data up twice. Both P5 Backup and Archive have the ability to write to tape, disk, and cloud storage. So that means any kind of disk storage, any vendor's tape hardware from standalone tabletop drives to libraries, and we support a variety of different cloud vendors. More on that in a moment. So P5 Backup is about copying data and not keeping it forever. Whereas P5 Archive is about moving data away from your online storage into an offline scenario so that you're not filling that storage up, and doing that in a way that you can control. So unlike a backup which just backs up everything, with Archive you select what you want to archive because you know that that's completed work or stuff that no longer needs to be on live online storage, but you know you might need it back in the future, so therefore you're keeping it for the long term. And you can choose the kind of storage that you use. You might want to do that to LTO tapes. You might want to put that in Amazon or Backblaze Cloud, or you might want to have some combination of both of those things for security. P5 Archive includes mini asset management functionality, which allows you to browse and see previews and metadata of the assets that you have moved to that offline storage. And integrates with a number of different MAM products, and Kyno being a kind of a simple kind of MAM, but also a media browser and something that allows you to manipulate and annotate media falls into that category. So in addition to P5 Archive, we have just briefly P5 Synchronize, which is a cloning or replication tool which can pick up data from one host and storage and make a copy of that data to another place, maybe a server located at a different location over the IP network. It can create snapshots and versions and basically gives you a disk-to-disk copy of important data so that it can be used as a backup effectively. Backup to Go on the far right is a workstation backup product that can back up multiple Mac and Windows machines back to a central backup server over the IP network. So this is our suite of data management products. As mentioned earlier, we support disk, tape, and cloud storage, just to put a bit more meat on the bone there. So disk support any vendor, whether it's direct attached, network attached, or a SAN. Tape, we support any vendor's tape drives enclosed in any vendor's tape library enclosures, where those are the rack mount things like the big box that you see here. Another slide on that in a sec. And then our cloud support works with Amazon S3 and Glacier, Microsoft Azure, Backblaze B2, who now have a European presence, Google's cloud storage, Wasabi Hot Cloud, which is an American vendor, who also have data centers in Europe. And we also support anything that works with the S3 protocol for cloud storage. So that means that there's a lot of different cloud vendors that you can archive to. The tape support, I just wanted to point out that you can start with something like a 25-slot LTO library, but we are able to scale to large libraries with hundreds of slots and multiple LTO drives, and we can do things like cloning across multiple drives to give you redundancy of the data that you're archiving. So we have very advanced and sophisticated tape support. Final slide, I think, on P5 is just to say that we run on via installers on Windows, Mac, Linux, FreeBSD. We can even run on Solaris. We are in the stores for these common network attached storage products from QNAP, Synology, and Netgear. So you can go search within your, for example, QNAP web interface for Archiware and click to install it, just like an app store. And we're also deployable in Amazon's AWS Marketplace, so you can fire up a P5, a Linux OS with P5 pre-installed inside of Amazon's cloud to have a cloud deployed archiving capability, or just to do some testing and demonstrating of the product with an easy way to get it running. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Thomas, who's going to describe a typical workflow. Then we're going to jump into a demo where we're going to switch ends. Thomas is going to show us his screen and give us a quick overview of Kyno. Then we're going to switch back to me. I'm going to specifically show archiving some assets within Kyno to a P5 server with an archive plan set up. And then we'll be done. And then we'll look at your questions. So over to you, Thomas, for this slide.
Thank you, David. Just to set up the stage for my demo, I wanted to outline a typical workflow involving both Kyno and P5 Archive. So we're looking at a production team, in-house production team working off of a shared storage. You have field teams or a field team and a camera crew, producer bringing in footage with metadata from the field. There may be collaborators, collaboration with remote team members, a remote editor, for example. And finally, when the project is over, we want to have a process where we archive footage and remove it from online storage. So that's basically what we'll be looking at. And with that, I will switch over to
I will make you the presenter right now, Thomas.
Go.
Excellent.
Should be visible now.
Yep, I see you.
Okay.
Okay.
So when you fire up Kyno, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you've ever used a Finder, you know what to do. It just presents a list of all the drives and devices that you have mounted on your machine. And up here, there's an area where you can basically add favorites, folders that you often work on. And for the first part of the demo, I will take the perspective of the producer or DOP in the field. And I've just come back from a day's shoot. Maybe I'm in a hotel room or already on the flight back home, and I want to basically look at my day's work. And for that, I just attach my SD card or the camera to my machine. You will see that popping up in a second. There we go. And you'll notice this little yellow arrow that indicates that Kyno detected that this is a camera card structure, and it goes into what we call drill down mode, which I will go into more detail about later. For now, it just basically allows you to not having to deal with these nested card structures, and just it just gives you all the media content that is on the card for you to browse and to have a look at. So typically you would go through your material, you can play it back in Kyno's ProGrade player that is frame accurate and gives you exact time codes, has all these little nuts and bolts that you need, be able to play back the footage slower. If you, for example, if you recorded high frame rate footage to be used as slow-mo, you can play that back in a way that it's intended. You can see that this footage has these washed out colors. So it was this one was recorded in a Panasonic camera with Panasonic V-Log settings, which is important to keep color information, as much color information as you can for post-production, but is not helpful when you want to see the real colors of what you have shot. So you can apply a LUT here directly in Kyno's player, and you'll see that the colors have now changed to something more viewable. You can start annotating your material in these typical film production metadata fields like reel, scene, shot, take, camera. Here I can enter the camera information. You can add custom tags that just make the material more accessible for people further down the line, because I just came back from the shoot. I have all the information fresh in my head, so I'm the best person to kind of add metadata at this point while screening. I can mark the good takes with a rating, for example. I can set markers at points that I like. Here I can say that she is smiling. I can also mark ranges, or what we call subclips, by setting an in point and then setting an out point, like so. I'm doing this with keyboard shortcuts. You can do it all with menus, but I hope you get the idea. I'll create a subclip here, which is like a marker, but has a duration, and I can just say that's the subclip where she's smiling. I'm going to go back to the overview of my card. So basically, you would go through all that material. You can see the icons popping up here, which indicate that I have, added metadata to this clip. Kyno is very strong in batch operations. So anything that everything that I've done on the single item view, I can do on a selection of clips. So here, for example, I can assign the camera LUT to the whole rush. This is just the metadata operation, so the actual footage doesn't change. It's just associated metadata, and then I can go into all those clips and preview them properly without having to assign LUTs to every single clip. The next typical step in such a situation would be that I offload the material to probably multiple hard drives, just to keep backups of the footage, and maybe have one main drive that I will just copy every day's work onto and then bring it back to the office. I can do this with Kyno's integrated copy and verify function, which is accessible here in the context menu of any folder. When I start that, I can see that it used the source that I had selected, my SD card, and I can just specify up to 4 destinations that I want to offload to. That's a functionality that is typically done with other software like SilverStack or Hedge or Shotput Pro. This is all integrated into Kyno's interface. I can just give it a little name. Now I'm just offloading that to my local drive. I can pick the verification method here, which is important for processes that you have in your company. Some people prefer MD5 checksums, the others prefer XXHash. So you can select that here. I'll choose XXHash, which is the fastest one in this case. Kyno creates the industry standard media hash list on the destination, which allows you to use third-party tools to verify that the footage is still valid and not corrupt or has been copied properly. I can send this off in the background. It'll just do the offloading work in the background. What's important here is that the metadata is copied along, obviously. The way Kyno deals with metadata is very friendly for copying, sharing, and backing up and archiving, because it travels along with the footage. I can get into more details on that later, but for now, it's suffice it to say that it just comes along when you offload the footage to other drives. Another optional step in this process would be if you have a remote team that you want to send dailies to, for example, you can use Kyno's integrated transcoder and transcode to proxies, small resolution proxies for somebody to look at the footage that you've produced on a remote location, for example. The easiest and simplest way to do that right out of the box is to use Kyno's transcoder and transcode the footage into a Dropbox folder, for example. I've selected here my Dropbox folder. I can tell it to keep the folder structure that I have on my source device. I can tell it to skip items that I have already transcoded. So this is good for incremental work. So if I just keep adding footage to my offloading drive, for example, and I want to create proxies for those, that's possible with that new option. And I can just, like the offloading, I can start that as a background job, which will run and transcode the footage to my Dropbox folder, and Dropbox will do what it does in the background, syncing that footage over to my collaborators. I'll actually cancel this right now because I don't want to have too much Dropbox stuff going on in the background.
So if somebody that you were collaborating with, Thomas, was to just point, if you're sharing that Dropbox folder with a colleague, and so ultimately that same folder will get downloaded onto their machine, when they point Kyno at that folder, they will see all of the annotations, the metadata, the subclips will all go across with it. So they will see all
exactly.
Yeah, and if they make any changes or add subclips and so on, then your copy will also, your Kyno will also reflect those changes because it's looking at the same metadata.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's actually a very neat feature of it. The way it works is that these metadata changes are almost instant, because all we need to sync are little XML files. Basically, if somebody makes metadata changes, we don't need to transfer the whole clip. It'll be pretty much instant, and even while you're in Kyno, you will see those changes reflected.
So it's basically,
so that's pretty neat. We have
sidecar files, isn't it? It's not. Yeah, would you call them sidecar files? It's a term that I'm familiar with, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's sidecar files. Pretty much, it's not right next to the clip. They are in a hidden subfolder, so they're not. They're slightly different, but it's pretty much the same principle.
Okay.
Yeah. So another way to collaborate with others is to use our Frame.io integration, which works pretty much the same way. You select a bunch of clips and then you choose send to Frame.io. And I won't go into the details of all these options now, but for example, you can tell it to send transcoded files here, choose a transcoding preset that you would like to use, and choose a folder on Frame.io and just hit start delivery, and it'll transcode and upload all your clips onto Frame.io, giving you all the features that Frame.io has for collaboration. So moving on to the second part of my demo, I will now switch perspective back to the in-house team, the post-production team. For that, I will eject my SD card and attach an external drive that will just serve as my production drive, which we would typically be a NAS. In this case, all my footage that the team has brought in has been copied and offloaded onto the production storage, and now the post-production team starts its work, basically. This is my project, and what you typically end up with on these production drives is these nested folder structures. So you can see here all my footage has been offloaded into the footage folder, all the different cameras. Maybe I've used drones, maybe there are multiple sources for cameras, and these folder structures become challenging. So that's where Kyno's drill down function comes back into play, because what you can do on a single SD card, you can do on whole folder structures on a shared storage or drive, which becomes really powerful. So if I turn this on, you will just see that it presents me with a flat view of all the footage in the footage folder. You can see with all these little icons that metadata has been added to them. And I can now start searching for the footage that I want to use. I can use the quick filters that tell it to only display videos, for example. You can limit it to a certain time range. But you can also add advanced metadata filters. So I could, for example, look for everything that is 4K, for example. And I can combine this with text-based filtering. So I can search for everything that contains car, and everything containing that starts from the file name to tags to description that I've added. So all the text metadata that I've added will be searched in this filter. Going back, I will just use the example that I've created on my SD card. So if I want to find the smile that I've marked, I can just type that in up here and go in, as a post-production team. I can start adding more metadata if I want to. I can also transcode to intermediate formats. Some people prefer that because it would allow you, rather than sending the original media into the editing application and let it transcode the footage, you can basically make a selection of your footage beforehand and use Kyno's incremental transcoding feature to do this before the edit, and thus save space and possibly time. This would be done in the same way that I showed before. You just open the convert dialog and you choose one of the editing presets, for example, ProRes 422 LT, which is both available on macOS and Windows. I won't be doing that here now. The other typical thing that you would do at this point is to send the footage that you have found over Kyno to your editing application of choice. As I've mentioned in the earlier slide, there are integrations with Adobe Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and Final Cut Pro, all available under this Send to menu in Kyno. Just to demonstrate, I'll quickly send this to DaVinci Resolve, show you how the metadata travels across. There are some settings that you can do regarding the bin structure that you want to create in Resolve, and send that off to Resolve. Resolve integration has been added in version 1.8 as well, just brand new. I'll tell it to import the media, and very simple. I can see that it has imported all my footage. It has created subclips for the subclips that I have marked, which there are two ways to look at that in Resolve, depending on your preference. One as a separate asset, and one time as like a sub clip under the main clip, which is very practical. So you can see everything that I've marked here comes across to Resolve, and I can just drag these on my timeline and start editing.
Cool.
So I think that concludes the core workflow demo that I do. Just so you know, there are tons of little tools in there that I won't be able to show here now that will aid the process. You can create Excel shot lists, you can export, import metadata from different sources. Again, important here is that all the metadata that is captured very early in the process travels all the way through, and by enriching your footage in that way, you basically, that in combination with a Kyno's drill down mode, you basically turn your production storage in a MAM, a very production focused MAM that is very easy and practical to use. And because that metadata exists outside of the NLE, it opens up possibilities for archiving that David will demonstrate, because now we've looked at the typical workflow from on location to post-production. And I'll hand over to David to show us how to archive and restore projects from Kyno.
I'll share my screen again. So I think now you should be able to see the Kyno window. And let me just pull up the other window that I'm looking to get hold of. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is just simply archiving some files directly from within Kyno to P5, and then how we would recover those files back to our disk storage from within P5. So I've got an SSD drive attached to this Mac, and on this drive I've got this completed project folder which contains a movie file plus a folder with some JPEGs inside of it. And by pointing Kyno at this completed project folder in drill down mode, just looking at the top level, I get to see all of the assets within that folder structure. So I've configured Kyno in the preferences here under integrations to point to my Archiware server. There's a little dialog here that I use to connect up to the server address with the correct authentication information so that Kyno can speak to P5. And then in my P5 installation, so this is P5's web UI in the browser, I have pre-configured various different archive plans, one to disk, one to cloud, one to LTO tape. So I will be able to select from one of these within Kyno. So simply in Kyno, if I just go to an asset and right click, I can send this to my archive, or I can make a selection of multiple files, or in this instance, I'm going to do the whole folder. So I'm going to right click on the folder, send to Archiware P5. I see my 3 different archive workflows showing up via the drop down, and all I need to do is click the start button. So you see down in the bottom left hand corner, the spinning arrows tell me that there is a job running. We get a progress bar. There is some back and forth communication going on, so Kyno knows how far P5 has got with that archive. And just as it finishes, you may have seen the folder disappears from my Samsung drive. So the completed project has now gone, and indeed it is no longer visible in the Finder. Where it does remain visible, however, is now within P5's archive index. So if you want to recover data that's been archived from within Kyno, you have to go browse the Archiware P5 archive index to locate what it was that you archived. So we'll do that now. So under the Restore tab, we click on the archive index. Within P5, you can have various different databases for storing archive data. We just have the default database currently. And then we're looking at a file browser effectively at this point. So I can browse down to my Samsung T5, and you can see here, here's the completed project folder that was archived at 16:29 local time today. And I can drill into this and see that there is a movie file. I can double click on the movie, and I have P5 set up to generate a 10-second proxy that I can play in the browser. I've just done this for sort of speed during the demo so that it's not going to take long to render the proxy, but these proxies can be made using FFmpeg to any spec that you desire. This properties window for this archived file also will tell me when this file has been archived. It might be that it's been archived several times, and it will show me the volume, which would also equate to a specific tape if you were using LTO tapes to store your archive data. Likewise, in the running folder, I have JPEGs of all of those, previews all of those JPEGs that I can also view. So let's go back and just say we want to recover this completed project folder. I'll add this to my restore basket. I could add various other folders. I might want to restore lots of different projects in one go. To trigger the restore, I'll click this button here, and then I will specify the folder that I want this to be restored back to, which is the root of the Samsung SSD drive. And then the next screen will tell me how many megabytes or gigabytes worth of files we're restoring, where they're going to go, and which volume, which would be a tape, or in the case of disk storage, it's a folder where we store the data. So if we start that job, we have a monitor window in P5 where we can see that running. This is all running between disks, so it should be fairly quick. And now if we go back to Kyno, we can see our completed project folder. If I just click update and switch drill down back on, you can see that data has all come back to its original location. And you can also see by the little icons above the movie that all of the subclips that are present within the metadata for this movie file have also been both transferred into the archive and back out again, which allows us to see those subclips, otherwise they wouldn't show up, plus various other tags and markers that have been added to this particular file. So yeah, that's how Kyno is able to integrate via a couple of clicks with P5 on the back end, P5 managing the archive workflow to either disk, tape, or cloud. Lots of different ways that you can set the P5 archive up, including capturing metadata, previews, and searching directly within P5. And hopefully that gives you a good rounded idea of both what Kyno is able to do and how Kyno can usefully integrate with P5 on the back end to assist with archiving, which is obviously something that everybody has their online production storage filling up on a pretty regular basis, I think. So some kind of archive workflow is really important. So with that, I think we have a couple more slides. Just to say that both Kyno and P5 offer a 30-day trial evaluation license. So we have our download link there, p5.archiware.com/download. You can request a key if you don't already have one, or you can contact me or your local distribution partner. And Kyno have the same deal. They have a free 30-day trial. You can download either their Mac or Windows installer and fire that up. It starts a timer for 30 days, I think, doesn't it, Thomas? And then after 30 days,
yes,
you decide if you want to put the money down and buy yourself a license.
Again,
excellent.
It's for Mac and Windows.
Yeah, cross-platform. So it's the same
downloadable on our website.
sort of code base, is it, that you use across both platforms?
Yeah.
Okay. So if anybody has any questions arising, please go ahead and enter them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. We have a couple of questions already, so I'll read them out and then we can decide who it makes most sense to answer. So Mark asks, can the user initiate a media restore from the Kyno GUI, or do you have to restore directly from P5? This is a question we predicted we might get, wasn't it, Thomas?
Yes.
And here it
Yes,
is.
we prepared that one. So no, not currently. With Archiware P5 version 6, was it, David?
Yeah, that's right, version 6.
This has become more conceivable. At least we haven't implemented it yet, but in P5 there is now the to create stub files when you archive material. Kyno, further down the road, we could look at Kyno looking at those stub files and being able to trigger restore from there. Browsing the full archive of P5 is not possible technically at this moment. So we couldn't.
Not at this moment, no. Although we will explore the possibility of having some kind of integration that works against the stub files, so that you can maybe view those within Kyno. So that's watch this space, I think I would say there. The thing with Kyno is that it's not able to track an asset offline because Kyno keeps things simple by not having a database sitting behind and tracking the metadata associated with all of the assets. So kind of I see Kyno's strength is that you can just point it at a file system and it starts to be useful immediately without having to do a lot of preparatory work on getting the database just right. And for that reason, we can't track the assets into the archive because we don't have the database with which to track them. So yeah, I won't say any more on that.
Great answer, thank you.
Yeah, Tom, he asks, is Kyno sold online only? And he's as a reseller, no. Is there a distribution partner in the US?
Yes, we do sell over resellers, over interested resellers. So I would say get in touch with us and we can have that conversation. It's not exclusively over the web store.
Okay.
I hope that.
I'll put the first slide up again in case you didn't catch Thomas's email address. Okay, so question from Gerhard. Can I get a recording? Yeah, I forgot to mention at the start, but all of these webinars are recorded. This is being recorded. I'll make an edit of it and put it on Archiware's YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search for Archiware, it'll show up. Plus, if you've registered for this webinar and we've got your email address, we'll send you an email with the link. So that's a definite yes to that one. Martin asks, question, is there an API out of Kyno to get metadata into a database? There's one for you, Thomas.
An API to get metadata out, technically, yes. The way that Kyno stores the metadata, I've briefly mentioned that, is in these little sidecar files that are just plain XML files, which you could theoretically read. That's at least how we approach integrations into MAMs, where we give them information about this XML file, which you can just extract for yourself, and then transform that and import it into a MAM, for example. Aside from these sidecar files, there's also a metadata export in Kyno that basically is the same format, but just combines all these single item XML files into a large XML file. Now, if you build something on top of that XML format, we have not formally committed to keeping that stable and readable by third parties. So we would, need to talk, but that is basically the interface that would allow you to at least do data migration into another system, for example.
I've taken the liberty of opening one of your metadata files in a text editor just on the screen here for something to look at. So you can see there that all of the metadata is stored in that file within this hidden subdirectory called less pain store, LP for less pain, I'm assuming. So that's the folder which travels around with the assets that you've been applying metadata to. So there'll be that same folder will exist in the running folder, which will have a metadata file which provides all the metadata for these JPEGs in this particular file, a bit like DS Store on a Mac, isn't it? Okay.
And just to add that, this answer is not what you typically expect when you ask for an API. Of course, there you would expect some kind of programming API that you can talk to. So as Kyno is a client-only application for now, there is no API that is exposed locally, as we don't have these workflows yet.
Yeah.
But again, in migration scenarios, this could be practical. But again, no guarantee for now that we keep that format stable. I hope that answers your question. We can definitely dive in more on a direct channel if you'd like.
Excellent. Question from Dave. Any plans to implement basic cuts only editing? This would be useful for initial string outs from media clips. Cuts only editing.
So I presume this is about being able to kind of put together a bunch of clips and just preview them in one go. We are considering doing this in a simple way. Like, we won't become an editing application. We won't become, I forget the name now, Adobe Rush, is it? This is not what we'll become, but there is a place for simple news cuts, or they have different names in Kyno, and we will look at that in the future. I cannot tell you when at this point, though.
Okay, but it's being something that's being
1.9.
considered. And final question for the time being, also from Dave. Is support planned for EXR files, particularly with DWAA compression?
Yes, I'm not familiar right now with DWAA compression, so I'm not sure how that is special, but DPX, which implies support for image sequences, I presume, that is a big one, and that is exactly that roadmap for 1.9, if I can reveal that right now. So we are planning on adding image sequence support.
Take a folder full of frames and then render a proxy from that folder, pulling all the frames together into a clip, to a media file.
Make it playable basically at first, being able to display a thumbnail from that and use the same controls that you would use with a normal video file on an image sequence, and then being able to transcode it, etc. as well.
Are you able to do that with FFmpeg?
Excuse me?
Sorry, I interrupted you there, Thomas. I was just wondering if you're using FFmpeg to do the rendering. Is DPX? No.
No, actually, no. We use some parts of the FFmpeg library to do decoding and demuxing and encoding, but our transcoding framework is our own IP, so that exactly allows us to do these sort of things.
Gives you flexibility.
Yes, and DPX, we will pick the best decoder that is available to Kyno on each platform and do that maybe through FFmpeg libraries. I'm not sure right now.
Okay.
But that is definitely planned. Again, not sure about the special compression.
Positive for Dave, anyway. Yeah.
DWAA, was it? I'll check that
DWAA,
out.
yeah. We'll get a transcript of the question, so I'll make sure that you've got a copy of that, Thomas. One more question just in from Tom. Is there any support for a speech-to-text transcription? So,
no, not yet. Another thing that we're looking into, again, is different than in a server-based central MAM, because it's a client application. But we have run internal lab prototypes for that type of thing. I can't reveal more at this point. We are looking into that, but it's not on the roadmap for 1.9, so I can't tell you when that'll land. We have been thinking about it quite a few times, so it's likely there will be something.
So it sounds like broadly most of the questions where people are asking, are you considering this? You are. So you seem to be quite in tune, certainly with this selection of users on a Wednesday afternoon. Okay, so we are now 47 minutes in by my watch. I don't see any more questions, but if you are just typing one in, we'll give you 10 seconds to finish it and we'll answer it. Thanks everybody for sticking around. I don't think anybody's dropped off, so you've all enjoyed the content. Hopefully you've learnt something about both P5 Archive and Kyno this afternoon. Like I said, there'll be a video on Archiware's YouTube channel. We'll email you a link. Any other questions, just get in touch with either Thomas or myself directly. Thanks again for attending. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you from my side as well. Thank you, David. Thanks
Okay, lovely.
to everyone.
Thanks. Cheers, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.